So the next subject here is the fashion magazines and fashion plates. So at the beginning of the 19th century, fashion news was transmitted by word of mouth or by letter. For example, we have quite a few surviving letters of Jane Austen and her sister discussing different fashions and fashionable people, and actually going into great details in the descriptions of the colors and the styles and the clothes that were fashionable. But gradually this kind of informal circulation of information is replaced by fashion magazines and especially fashion plates, that is the illustrations included in fashion magazines to actually illustrate what was the latest fashion. First such magazines started appearing in the later years of the 18th century, and then they only grew because this was a massive hit. Initially they were aimed at professional people, at dressmakers and tailors, but soon enough everybody wanted to read about fashion, and the magazines started to include other subjects such as advice on fashionable furniture and interior design and other aspects of fashionable leisure activities. So actually, if we look at the history of fashion plates, the best fashion plates come from the first half of the 19th century, because they were printed on better quality paper than the rest of the magazine. So they were usually like added pages, added plates, which were separately printed and very often hand colored. So they could be really pretty. Sometimes you can buy them in antiquarian shops, and I've seen many people using them as pictures, decorative pictures on their walls. So you could have images showing just one person wearing fashionable clothes, or a couple wearing matching fashionable clothes. There's usually some sort of indication of the occasion that these clothes were meant to, like whether they were evening clothes or day clothes, whether they were for a walk in the park, or let's say a dinner or a theater outing. You would have some sort of indication of that. Sometimes quite popular way of showing the fashion plates would be to have a scene presenting a hostess and a female guest. So one lady would be wearing indoor clothes of a hostess, and the other one, coming from the outside, would be wearing day clothes, slightly more formal. We'll talk about the levels of formality next week. Some fashion plates would concentrate on details. Like here we have an example of a fashion plate from the Romantic period, mostly focusing on headwear. So hats and hairstyles. As you can see, both hats and hairstyles at this time were very elaborate and very sophisticated, so they merited a separate fashion plate altogether. And here we have another hand-colored, printed, full-page size fashion plate from the 50s, showing a situation between a hostess and a guest. Later, if we look at the fashion plates from the 60s, from the Bustle period, from the Belle Epoque, they lose this quality. They are no longer colored, so they are black and white, or they are integrated into the text of the of the magazine, so they are not printed on separate pages on better quality paper. Why would it happen this way, and why on earth wouldn't they be using photographic materials if photography was available from the 1840s at least? The reason why the fashion plates are better material for studying fashion than the photographs is that the photographs show reality and fashion plates show the ideal. So if you want to focus on the clothes and especially what was fashionable, the fashion plates would always be a little bit exaggerated. So if, let's say, the big hats were the thing, the hats on the fashion plate would be given special attention. If the big sleeves were the thing, the sleeves would be given special attention. As I mentioned before, also we have a kind of standardized look of beautiful young rich people modeling the clothes on the fashion plates, whereas the real wearers on portraits or photographs could represent any kind of human looks, not necessarily the standard tall, slim and pretty. Why then would the quality of the fashion plates go down slightly, well, not so slightly, in the second half of the 19th century? The reason is the inclusion of the cutout patterns. At the beginning of the 19th century, the fashion plates would be the only way, other than written description, to inform the readers of the new styles or of the new fads. If you wanted to have a new dress made, you would go to a dressmaker and either look through a fashion magazine there or bring a fashion plate with you and say, I want a dress like that. And actually the dressmaker would have to know how to translate the image on the fashion plate into a real three-dimensional object that you could wear. So the skill of cutting the fabric and stitching the fabric together was quite extensive. And most non-professional women did not really attempt to make the clothes for themselves. They didn't have the skill to cut the fabric, and they didn't want to waste the fabric, of course. What you might sometimes find in fashion magazines, like this page here from La Belle Assemblée, and this is an English magazine despite the French name, and you have quite often the magazines printed in England with French titles like Miroir de la Mode, La Belle Assemblée, Le Bon Genre, what else? Petit Courrier des Dames. So these are all authentic titles of fashion magazines because, of course, France was regarded as a very fashionable place, and especially Paris. So you would have Mode de Paris, so it's the indication that this is the newest French fashion. It wasn't always true. We'll talk about it when we talk about the neoclassical fashion, but what you might find there, and here is an image, is pattern for simple decoration, like embroidered decoration for a hem of a skirt, or maybe a collar, or maybe a handkerchief, something that a lady could reproduce herself. Usually nothing requiring stitching, heavy stitching or cutting, so it's just decoration. From the 50s onwards, many magazines start including patterns for cutting the fabric to get the clothes. So here we have an example from 1857. So a diagram of a shirt. So we have all the elements that you need to cut from the fabric and stitch together to have a shirt. So this is a male garment, but of course women would very often make those garments for their husbands and sons and brothers. So what we have is a very simple diagram. Of course, you needed to adjust the measurements to the size of the wearer. So you need to be able to take the measurements and to interpret the measurements and to cut the fabric and stitch the fabric together. So the fashion plates lost a little bit of their importance because they only became a kind of general illustrative material rather than the only illustrative material. They would just give you some general idea of what was fashionable, like you have here some dresses, an assembly of dresses from the very late moment in the crinoline period, just as it's going to be replaced by the bustle. So the crinolines are kind of elongated towards the back already. You have 5 images of 5 women who would never meet because the times of day and occasions would be completely different. This is just general indication of, let's say, the fashionable shape of the skirt. Or in the Belle Epoque example here, you have 2 examples of day costumes. So nobody would be expected to be able to reproduce such costumes just by looking at the image. So that's what makes the fashion plates so interesting and so important, and this is why we'll be mostly using fashion plates as illustrative material for the course rather than, let's say, photographs of authentic surviving dresses. There will be some, but not many of them. Or portraits. There will be some, but portraits focus on the wearer and fashion plates focus on the clothes, and this is really what will be interesting here. So we continue in a moment.